Today, I am extremely excited to be sitting down with Kat Anderson, Director of International Marketing at Sprout Social, and also the host and creator of the Social Creatures podcast, a podcast all about social media for social media professionals, and one of my favorite podcasts that I like listening to. Kat, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephen, for such a lovely intro. Yeah, I'm great. Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here with you as well today. And I am always happy to hear that people enjoy the podcast. So you put a big smile on my face.
No, it's great work, and as I said, I'm a big fan, and I'm going to shame and publicly embarrass myself now, but been a long time admirer, and have done my own bit of fanboying over the years. So it's really quite nice to and surreal even to be able to sit down with you and just talk. So I thought let's jump straight into it. So Kat, what does being the the international director of international marketing at Sprout Social involve?
That is a great question. And it might be easier sometimes to talk about what it doesn't involve. Primarily the regions that I look at this point in time. Would be EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and APAC, so Asia and Australia and New Zealand and everything around there. But yeah, Sprout Social is an American-based company. We're a global international company, but it is headquartered in Chicago, and so a lot of our resources are headquartered there as well. So I was the first hire for the marketing team outside of America about 4 years ago now. And yeah, it was interesting because I was brought in to assist with marketing with our, at the time, ambitious, exciting, dynamic EMEA team based in Dublin. But everything kind of needed to be done. We didn't really have an awful lot of stuff. So everything from localizing content to creating new lead generation drivers to figuring out what our PR strategy was going to be to arranging and sorting out which events we were going to go to making sure we had appropriate spokespeople. Honestly, Stephen, if you can name it, I probably have done it. And whether it was me driving it or I was working in liaison with like the project owners in the US, I've really been able to put a lot of strings into my bow in this role. And so I think that's great. Like I pride myself on being a marketing generalist, and this role has certainly cemented that.
I was going to say, I'm not sure how you managed to have any time for rest. That sounds like quite a packed schedule. But I guess that's you reflecting on where you currently are. So the natural progression from that would be: did you always imagine this would be what you sort of doing when you were growing up, and sort of could you explain sort of your path that's led you to this point?
I feel like I've got a little bit of a disappointing answer because I think when I was a little girl, I sort of dotted around a bunch of different things I wanted to be. I wanted to be a vet because I like animals, but I actually like animals too much. So I would have been a terrible vet. It would have been much too upsetting. I wanted to be an author. I still would like to be an author. But I think actually my path into this role is quite an interesting one. So whenever I was 24, 25, I was working part-time at the BBC and part-time in a theatre in Northern Ireland. And a little pamphlet floated into the theatre where Channel 4 and the production company working with Channel 4 were looking for participants for Come Down With Me. And so I thought, why not? I'll give it a go. I've never cooked really anything in my life. Went on to Come Down With Me, which for anyone who doesn't know is a competitive cooking show on Channel 4. You cook dinner parties for a group of strangers. And I actually came joint first. So I got £500 in my hand. And I just was like, do you know what? I'm going to spend this. And a friend of mine was traveling through Europe and said, come and meet me in Berlin. So I went to Berlin, And it was just one of those very strange moments in life where by the second day, I just thought, God, I should move here. There was such a spirit of entrepreneurial ambition. There was the tech scene was really exploding around that time. I was seeing a lot of energy and diversity and just excitement that wasn't existing in Northern Ireland at that point in time. So I came home, handed in my notice at both of my jobs, who both thought I was crazy. And I went off to Berlin and thought I'll give myself 3 months to make it work. So I ended up staying for 5 years, but that was where I started working for startups. And I think my first role was a sales role. And then I very quickly pivoted into marketing and community because I remember sort of, going on these sales calls and I liked them. Like I like talking to people, but I could see the girl doing the marketing and I was like, well, that looks so much more my jam. And so again, that was where I think I really sort of, yeah, like cut my teeth as a marketing generalist. Working in startups, you kind of do have to wear many hats. And yeah, so then when I decided to return to the UK and Ireland, I had a lot of experience under my belt in quite a short amount of time. And I was able to, there was a better scene and a better sort of tech scene, a better sort of that sort of entrepreneurial spirit. I quite like a small and growing company. That was a lot more established by that point. So yeah, then the rest, as they say, is history.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. So I guess I think perhaps unfairly you're branding yourself as a generalist, but and perhaps I already know the answer to this question. But I'm assuming that you're probably one of these people that is a massive proponent of the broader the experience, the better as you sort of progress, and or perhaps that was a misread on my part.
No, I mean, I think it depends. I think, there's always that sort of discussion about sort of the T shape of how you can go in a career. You can either go like broad and cover many, many angles, or you can go deep into one area and become an absolute expert in it. And I think both have got huge value. I absolutely love working with people who are total subject matter experts, like people who are, somebody who's so passionate about SEO, for example, or something where, when you're really getting into the nitty gritty of it, myself as a generalist, I'm listening to this person, understanding the implications of the nuances of their work, but I would not have a baldies about how to actually do all of that. And so I think both trajectories have got huge value. We always need subject matter experts. And especially in marketing, we need the people who can actually find the nuances that are really going to accelerate strategies, beyond our competitors. But I do think on the generalist side of things, as I've got older and as my career's progressed, I'm increasingly in leadership positions and I love working with people, but I do think that as a generalist, it's better to have a broad understanding of all of the people who are working under you. Um, I'm lucky that I've had a lot of great bosses, but I've certainly had bosses in the past where it was very clear that they didn't know what work I was doing and they didn't actually understand the work I was doing. And so I've always sort of made it a priority as a leader to, whilst I might not know as much as a total subject matter expert on, I don't even know what area, but I want to have a fundamental understanding. And I think that at the leadership level, having that broad understanding of how all of the components of your strategy work together, I think that's really, really important. So yeah, I think there's value in both, Stephen. That's very diplomatic, but it's a truthful answer.
Yeah, no, for sure. And do you think, sort of as you were progressing and sort of having those conversations with, senior leaders that may not have been as au fait with the sort of work that you were doing or the sort of direction of the industry, was there any specific challenges that you experienced and sort of how did you navigate them?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And I think one thing that probably all marketers, and actually it's something, working at Sprout, we talk to a lot of people who are in the area of social. And I think this is something that, as a reasonably developing branch of marketing, this is something that is felt a lot, where potentially the executives above you or your bosses or the people who are sort of making the decisions or holding the purse strings can't really understand the potential of things. And I think I've encountered that. I've run up against that wall so many times where I'll be giddy and excited because I'll be like, oh my God, this is going to be fantastic. And people maybe just haven't got it. They're like, this maybe seems too risky, or we've never done this before. I don't know if we should do this, or how much does that cost? And what I have learnt over the course of running into that wall many times is creatives and the purse string holders think in different ways. So whilst we're coming with loads of energy and vision and creativity, that is not what is going to inspire somebody who's going to have to make this decision to say yes. So it's not really a trick. I think it's just the way to get around that. I always sort of say, like, okay, we need to think how these people think. They will think, much more in terms of numbers and return on investment, and how can you actually quantify that potential? How can you quantify that excitement? I used to find this such a difficult mental exercise because it just wasn't how my brain worked. But actually, yeah, what I always advise people to do is even frame things as a test. Instead of saying, I think we should start sending out, mad social media at like 4 a.m. because we think it's going to really perform really well in this certain part of the world. Instead, could you frame it, put parameters around it, say, like, I have a hypothesis that I think if we do this, then we will see X, Y, and Z. I would like that we test this for a period of 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 days, whatever it is. And what I suspect is that we'll see blah, 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 blah. The other thing that I say, because I think if you give it a time frame, that makes people feel comfortable with it. If you are very clear about what your hypothesis is. The other thing that I always say to people is, if you do feel very confident about this, which I'm sure most people do when they have an idea like this, is undersell what you think the results are going to be. Even just a little bit, like, still make it sound good in the pitch. But if you're convinced it's going to be an absolute, huge hit, undersell it a little bit in the pitch so that when you are delivering the results, they're like, whoa. And increasingly what you find is just by reframing how you approach somebody with these different ideas, I think can make things so much more easy, so much more smooth. And then, of course, if you are getting these great results, you build that trust up, and then that helps sort of build up your reputation internally as well. But that's something I've definitely encountered a lot of. So that's my trick.
I think that's a great trick. Definitely, I will be taken away or clearly remember the art of underselling oneself.
Yeah.
So obviously, you've sort of continued to branch out in your sort of professional capacity, and decided to become a podcast host too, which obviously is very complementary with the industry that you work in and the position that you hold. But sort of, how did that come about, I guess?
So when I worked at the BBC, I worked in BBC Radio and always had a bit of a soft spot for the medium of recorded audio. But that was unfortunately quite a long time ago. That was 15 plus years ago. And when I came to Sprout, as I said, I was the first person outside of North America to be hired. I was working in a different time zone. My boss was in a different time zone. I had sort of limited access to resources. I had limited budget. And quite bluntly, I wanted to find something that I could make a splash with and really make a big impact and dazzle them a little bit. I wanted to be noticed, and I wanted Sprout to sit up and go like, oh, wow, she's actually doing something that's like quite different, quite interesting. And so just after doing like a little bit of a competitive analysis, I could see that there was space in our industry for something like this. But so just going from my own experience as well, as somebody who likes to listen to podcasts, I felt that there was a place for us to have conversations about our professional aspects of our lives, but not in a really corporate manner. So I think a lot of business podcasts can get a little bit corporate jargony. Um, and to be honest with you, for me, that sort of language in a podcast leaves me a little bit cold, because I'm listening to podcasts when I'm walking my dogs or I'm commuting or whatever it may be. And overwhelmingly, you see the top of the podcast charts are things like comedies or things that are run by celebrities. So you have huge competition in this space. And so I was like, I wonder if we could have a conversation about people's journeys to success on social, but in a really warts and all manner, where we're actually having really honest conversations where instead of just saying like what was easy, let's talk about what was hard as well. Let's talk about maybe some of the accidental wins you had. Let's talk about, you know, some of the stuff that you can't really read in a business book about how this happened. Because you'll know as well, Stephen, the routes to success on social and the paths, I should say, to success on social are so varied. They're so unpredictable. And so we were very lucky because I got, again, the go ahead. I pitched it as a test. So I did actually pitch that one as a test. I was like, just give me a couple of episodes. We'll see how we go. And we were able to secure some really fabulous guests. And I think just from the off, it really resonated with people. You know, I think like all of the conversations I have with anyone that I meet at events or conferences, you know, we speak in normal terms and people talk about like the frustrations, the ups and downs of trying to make inroads in social media. And so I think the podcast just really was inspiring to people, because you would be hearing people behind huge campaigns or huge brands also sort of talking about what was hard about it as well. So it's just I think it's just nice to sort of feel like you can relate to somebody who's had tremendous success as well, or just hear from people that you're like, wow, you're quite cool on social. How are you doing it? So I don't know. Yeah. I mean, that was one of my more successful tests, I have to say. I couldn't have imagined it would have been, you know, we've just finished season 3 with National Geographic, who have, I believe, 870 million followers on social, which I still can't get over. But, you know, that's the caliber of guests that we're getting now. And it's wonderful.
I mean, as I sort of started, I'm an avid fan, and I've sort of obviously started my own sort of podcast journey in this very amateurish fashion. But how how did that guest selection for you come about? Did you have a sort of list of dream people that you wanted to speak to, and it was just a case of cold outreach and just tick and cross, or was it actually far easier than that?
That's a good question. I think we sort of were a little bit lucky in that we were able to, in my role, I would have been talking to different customers of Sprout or just meeting different people in the industry. So I was able to reach out to some people, some friendly faces, if you will, and ask them. So I think one of our first guests was the global head of social media for United Nations Women, which is a really interesting conversation. She's a really good friend of mine, Anu. And, you know, I think that having the United Nations Women as one of our first guests and being able to say that to people sort of validates it when you ask other people, when you say, oh, hey, like these are some of the other people we've had on. But we did have people we still do have plenty of people who we do cold outreach with. So the very, very first episode was a little bit controversial because it was with, I'm not sure if you remember this story, is with a guy who he ran a bakery in Leeds called Get Baked, and he had been shut down for some sort of infringement because somebody had complained about something, and he went absolutely ballistic on social media, but everybody loved it. Like they absolutely loved it. It went viral overnight. And he just really understood social. It is a small bakery in Leeds, and it went completely viral the world over. And he was, he was absolutely up for it. And it was, that was a really fun and kind of unexpected first episode. Then we've got the United Nations women on. Then we got Eurovision in season 1. We got like a really good mix of people. We also got Orkney Library, which I have to say, again, I don't know if everybody is familiar with Orkney Library on social media, but they are so deliciously gorgeous. Orkney is a small island
Yeah,
off the coast of Scotland, as I'm sure you're aware. And, it's a really unexpected little pocket of joy on the internet. So we just got, I think, a really good mixture. But yeah, I think, using our own network a little bit, but then where we could, trying to say like, oh, we've got these other superstars on, you should come and join. I think the other thing is, Stephen, honestly, sometimes when you're approaching big brands, people are going for the CEOs, they're going for the really big titles. Sometimes the social media managers or the people who are working on social, they're not the first people to be asked to interview. And so I think that actually helped as well, because they were like, yes, I would love to talk about my work, actually. I'm really proud of this. And, yourself from listening, it's not in our interest to have any stings in the tail or anything. We want to make we want to just shine a light on the great work that they're doing. So it's a really friendly, informal
yeah,
podcast. So yeah, I think that's sort of how it worked. And then we just got a bit of momentum then with the guests.
yeah. No, I'm really pleased that you actually did highlight the work that Orkney Library do. Obviously, my background is museums and heritage and culture, and that they've long been dominating that space
Mm-hmm.
for a testament to how the power of social can quite literally put something that should, and I say this in the politest terms, be fairly sort of uninteresting, and just it's a library and an archive in Orkney. It's now sort of almost a tourist destination.
Yeah.
But I was really sort of interested in, because you used the term there, sort of speak or get social, speak social, know social. And I was just, or understand social is what you actually said. But, I often find myself sort of having similar, using similar sort of sentiments and phrases. What does that mean to you?
My goodness, to understand social. I think to understand social is to be extremely humble and realize that it changes all the time. Um, I think, yeah, I think in very, very broad strokes, you can understand the differences and the nuances between platforms. So in very broad strokes, you can understand the difference between LinkedIn, Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. But to understand your own social, I think is it's sort of like the difference between understanding a recipe in a book and then understanding how you can cook it in your oven, with the weirdness of maybe how your oven door like leaks a little bit at the top right hand or something like that. I think, how social works for different companies' followings or different companies' tones of voice. Yeah, it's very, very, very unique to whichever account it is that you're running. But I do think most social media professionals I know also understand that it is an industry that just is evolving and changing at breakneck speed constantly. And that is either something you get on board with and enjoy and just ride the wave, or it's something that you don't. And then I would say that's quite difficult. Those are the accounts that don't really evolve. I think there are a few accounts which I think sort of stick quite resolutely to how they want to show up on social and it works for them. But mostly you need to have a flexible and I would say somewhat humble attitude to being like, okay, we have to sort of understand the field in which we're playing the game here. So I think, yeah, it's exciting, it's dynamic, it's changing, it's evolving. It's full of potential. It's a part of marketing that really is a level playing field in a way that is more accessible than a lot of other branches of marketing. But again, I think you kind of have to understand it in order to be able to access that level playing field. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting, and I can understand why a lot of people are a bit afraid of it. I can understand why a lot of people are a little bit resistant to it. Um, but at the same time, there's absolutely no denying the brands that are and the people that just get it and, have huge success with it.
Yeah, no, I often find it frustrating when
Absolutely.
we try to add, when I try to articulate it's sort of the sentiment as you just very eloquently have. Um, you sort of find yourself arriving at a point where you just say, some people just get it. They're just joining some invisible dots, and they're mapping sort of that brand tone of voice with their innate knowledge of how the internet works, and then mapping that onto how the platforms and audiences respond to content, and it's just meshes together in moments of magic. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair, but what I have discovered from talking to a lot of people who almost are like, they're like Neo in the Matrix when it comes to how they perform on social media. A universal truth is that they will always say that is because you're seeing the successes, and below the successes there are, for every one success there's 9 failures. There's no one who just innately gets it. I think everyone has posts that kind of flop. Everyone has, you know, things where they are convinced it's going to be really brilliant and it just hasn't worked out. And the flip side of that coin is everyone has had moments where they're like, this is the post that's successful? Really? And so I think that element of sort of not really truly understanding what's going to land in that big ocean of social media successfully at any point in time, I think that is a ubiquitous experience. Like no one ever truly, truly, truly knows. But the more you practice, it's like anything. The more you practice, the more you learn. And I know, again, another thing that all of these people say to me is that the more you fail, the more you learn, which I think is helpful because, as you said, it's very natural to feel frustrated when what you perceive is just all of these viral posts happening around you. But that's because they've gone viral. You don't see the huge underbelly of the iceberg of loads of things that haven't. So yeah, I find that so refreshing over the course of these 3 seasons to hear that just so universally from everyone. Like, so don't worry, Stephen, everybody gets frustrated.
well, that's good to hear. Thank you very much. So in terms of 3 seasons, a multi plethora of guests from a plethora of different brands and organizations and industries. What are sort of you know, the learnings that you're gleaning from 3 seasons, and sort of some key insights, or indeed some points that you would say were completely counterintuitive, but once they sort of told you, made complete sense?
So I think, okay, that's a great question. And I feel I can answer it in lots of different ways. So I'll try and not waffle for about half an hour here. I think number one is understanding what you want to get out of social, because I think there are a lot of metrics. There's a lot of things you can track. There's a lot of things you can grow. There's a lot of things you can achieve. But if you go into social just trying to sort of achieve it all and boil the ocean, it's not going to be successful. You need to, from the start, have set yourself some really targeted goals. So whether it's you want follower growth, whether it's you want high levels of engagement, whether you want lots of people sharing your posts, whether you want to get picked up by media, whatever it might be, really refine that from the off. I think, as well, as I mentioned in the previous answer there, understanding that failure is part of the journey. And I think importantly with that, I don't think there's any human on earth who is happy when they fail at something. So I think to say like, oh, just have this attitude that failure's wonderful, I don't think that's really that realistic, but I do think if you can try and incorporate a sense of playfulness and understanding that it's not the end of the world, like a badly performing post is just that, it's not going to ruin your career. If you can try and look at it and remove the emotion a little bit, just to be like, okay, well, I wonder why this didn't perform. And the other thing then, increasingly, and even, especially this season, I've heard it time and time again. And it's interesting because I think, social inherently attracts a lot of creatives, but looking at the data is increasingly it's a great way to expedite understanding what's working and what's not. So having a look and trying to really dig into whether it is data that you're using natively on the platforms, or whether if you're using a tool like Sprout or like any, there are other tools available. But
No, there's not. There's absolutely not.
But looking into the data is a great way to sort of unlock some of those questions that you might have about hey, really think this is good. Like, why did this not work? The other thing then, I think, is understanding that realistically, social media is kind of like walking into a huge dinner party, or walking into a massive party, and there are lots of conversations happening, and it might feel like, the opportunity is there for you to pipe up in all of them, but that probably will make you look a little bit strange by doing so. And so when I, stepping away from that analogy for a second, when you think about truly what is your brand voice, what makes sense for you, what is your brand comfortable with? Is your brand comfortable with having a Ryanair approach where you're going to be cheeky and, possibly a little bit scathing, but, extremely humorous? Or, are you going to be more refined? Are you going to be like Architectural Digest, and how they engage with humor is in a very, very, very different manner, but, equally successful on both very different sides of the spectrum? Understanding how your brand or company or account wants to show up, I think, is just so important. Because I do think, particularly with the Ryanair example, I think they sort of really, certainly in the UK and Ireland, really sort of blew a lot of competition out of the water with how that, they were like, wow, you are really and truly the kings of social media. Like, everyone's obsessed with this. But loads of people tried to copy, and loads of brands tried to copy in a way where sometimes it worked, sometimes a lot of the time it really didn't. And you would be like, oh, okay, you can't just copy and paste another brand's personality. It's like, our own personalities as humans. So I think it's quite a self-reflective thing. But yeah, I think overarchingly, though, the number one thing is just experimentation, I think. So playfulness and experimentation, and trying to keep that attitude with what you're doing, because I think it helps keep frustration at bay. It helps keep your mind open to learning and changes. And I think, honestly, it'll help you stumble across the magic a lot easier.
Well, I mean, it sounds very, again, another very eloquent, framed answer that sort of left me speechless there, which is rather rubbish for an audio format. But no, for sure. And sort of, obviously, the landscape of social evolves at the speed of light, it seems. How do you see the podcast, or how would you like social creatures to evolve in the future, and what's sort of your aspirations?
Sorry, so is this the evolution of social or the evolution of the podcast?
Evolution of the podcast.
Evolution of the podcast. Yeah, that's interesting. So at the end of every season, we do sort of think about that and think, what can we bring to the next season? And we have had little segments that each season has got something different. So in the first one, we had like a little sort of agony aunt corner where we had people write in and say like some of their issues that they were having with social. And then in the second season, we had we would get other industry names to send in a little question for the guest, just to sort of have it almost like a little like answer machine, like, "Hi, Stephen, I'm blah blah blah." Um, and this season, we have been using the Sprout Social LinkedIn platform where we send out a poll ahead of the episode, but will be related to the guest. So we've sort of, we try to sort of add a little thing in like that just to sort of mix it up season to season. But I have to say, truly, the format has stayed fairly similar in that it is an informal conversation with somebody who has worked on or has been at the heart of something that has been quite notable, like a notable success on social. And I mean, we've increasingly got, more momentum with guests. And I think I can't really see us changing that format too much. Maybe we'll add in another little thing, like another little seasonal, I don't want to say gimmick, but it's kind of like a little gimmick per season. We have another little kooky thing about 3/4 of the way through. But I think in general, the informal conversation with people and just making sure that we keep up with the caliber of the guests is probably how I would see it evolving. You know, we've had some guests that I do still think quite a standout one was Billy McFarland from Fire Festival. That was at the end of season 2. And, you know, I think as long as you're having conversations with people who, and I will say for better or worse, are interesting, yeah, that is something, that's an energy that will transmit through the recording, you know, like
Yeah.
for the most part, every single person I speak to, I'm quite fascinated by. And so I think hopefully that's something that the listeners can hear. And so I would like to continue that.
And sort of just from your own, from my own interest, sort of, from what sort of fuels that fascination from your perspective? You know, what are you trying to unlock or unpick, or is it different from guest to guest, or is there, is it there always some sort of commonality that you're looking to explore?
Yeah, I mean, I think the diversity of social media is, as I said earlier, there's so many different ways you can be successful on social. Um, and again, Billy McFarland was extremely successful on social. He was diabolical at running a festival. We had the guy who really annoyed Simon Cowell back in the day by getting Rage Against the Machine to Christmas #1, beating his X Factor bid. We've had, Architectural Digest, we've had Eurovision, we've had a bunch of different guests. And I think, the diversity of those conversations is just something that keeps it really fresh every time. Like, I think I just have a genuine interest in other people. I really love to hear what they're doing. And I think it's a universal law that if you speak to someone about anything that they're passionate about, it's really difficult to not get sucked up in that excitement, and like people love talking about things that they're proud of. And so that's always, I don't know. I always really enjoy the conversations. I'm not sure if there's much commonality except that it is on social media that these stories happen. I will say, of course, there's probably biases that I can't really acknowledge in that I am very much in the brainstorming process with my production team to source these guests. So it's not like they're just presented in front of me. So I think probably over the course of these 3 seasons, you might get a good idea of what my algorithm looks like and the sort of things that I'm seeing.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
yeah, I mean, there's definitely an enthusiasm from me because I'm familiar with these people or have encountered them in some way or another. But yeah, I mean, there are some people who, I wasn't as familiar with, and they maybe have been brought to me as a potential guest. And then I get into them and I'm like, oh, holy mackerel, they're absolutely brilliant. But yeah, I think the only commonality is really that they're good. They're good at social media, Stephen.
Well, that's not a bad commonality to have, is it? And so I guess looking forward, this is probably the $1 million question, but what do you think the future of social might look like in 5 years or so? Where are we headed?
So I think that we are headed. I've thought this for a couple of years, and I honestly think that the path is becoming more and more defined in front of us. I think we are headed more towards smaller, more private communities on social. So I think like if you follow the trajectory of influencer marketing, for example, I think that very much indicates that that's how people are using um, social and prefer to use it. So, a few years ago, when you thought of an influencer, you were thinking of Kendall Jenner, the Kardashians, whatever, these mega influencers with, millions of followers. And actually now what we're seeing is that in terms of engagement, in terms of, expertise, in terms of if you're going to be very mercenary about it, bang for your buck, if you're going to work with these influencers, it's actually the much smaller communities are the ones where people are building up trust. They are building communities. They're building a sense of camaraderie within the community and not just that relationship with the key influencer. And I think that, well, I really hope that that's going to continue. How we continue. I want that path to continue to roll out because I think it reflects what social media was actually created for, which is to be a digital social space. And I do think that when you get into the mega size communities, that can kind of get lost a little bit. I think Reddit does an amazing job of, fostering those smaller communities. Obviously Reddit in and of itself is an absolute monster community, but it does a really good job of making it extremely easy to find your own little pockets of this is what I'm really passionate about. And you can really dig into subjects with people who are like you and get different opinions. So that's the route I think it will go. I
Do you
think it's
think
going to
that
be, sorry.
sorry to interrupt. And do you think that route is going to dramatically change the way that sort of brands have to operate? And, how do you think that they'll have to pivot to a sort of
I do
more,
think that will change how brands will have to operate, but I think that it will be challenging. But I think it will be ultimately a good thing. I think it will force people to, as we said earlier in this, understand social a little bit more, understand where is the right place for them to pipe up in conversations. As, we are very firmly in an era of digital natives now. We've got Generation Alpha nipping on the heels of Gen Z. So millennials like me are old hat now. But, this is the world that we're in. We also find, I actually don't want to ignore like Gen X and like older generations as well, because I feel like they're often ignored in social conversations. And actually, everybody understands how social works now. Everybody is using it. And so consumer appetites and consumer parameters for what they will put up with from brands and seeing stuff that like feels a bit awkward or a bit cringy is so much more obvious. So I think it's going to force brands to not only take the time to understand social more, but also to invest in it more and to take it more seriously. Because I think the gap between those who do it well and those who do it poorly is only going to increase.
yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. Well, I mean, I could speak to you for another 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, Kat, but unfortunately, you've already been too generous with your time. So I think we call it a wrap there. So yeah, I guess, thanks very much for sitting down with me. When can listeners expect to be listening to the next season of Social Creatures?
So we don't have a date just yet, as we've just wrapped on season 3, and I actually am expecting my first child. So there'll be a little
Congratulations.
hiatus. Yeah, thank you, Stephen. There'll be a little hiatus, but yeah, I would say we'll make sure that there's lots of fanfare when it is coming out when we're coming out with season 4. But thank you very much for the time today as well. I've really enjoyed it.
No, it's fun. It's been my pleasure, and I'm very much indebted to you. So please do give Kat a follow on LinkedIn. She's definitely worth a follow, if only for the social creatures updates and also other industry insights. Thank you very much.